so everyone can see the slides.
Yep, I can see it.
There we go. Okay, so I'm going to just start off with talking about some financial supports and resources that are available that you may be able to tap into and hopefully benefit from. And then Tracey will come on and talk a bit about will preparation and guardianship. And hopefully we'll get a lot of great questions that we can help to work through some of your concerns. So if you have children under the age of 18, there are two main resources that you might be able to tap into. There is the Assistance for Children with Severe Disabilities, otherwise known as ACSD. We love our acronyms. And then there's also Special Services at Home. So ACSD basically is a monthly income that could help provide costs for extra expenses that you have relating to your child with a disability. So it is dependent on family income, the severity, and the extraordinary expenses that you may be incurring. So as an example, quite a lot of years ago when my oldest was young, I probably received $200 and some odd a month, and that helped cover the cost of travel. We had to go down to Toronto Western quite often, so that covered the cost of the gas and the parking and lunch out. He also had a severe foot tic. That meant he went through shoes like crazy, so it helped cover the cost of frequent running shoe replenishment and whatnot. So it's great that helps in those sorts of areas, and it could be laundering, diapers. It could be any expenses that you incur that you wouldn't with a child without that disability. There's also Special Services at Home, which is another great avenue for funding. It's not income based, so anyone can qualify. The amounts that they will offer is varied, but basically, if you have a physical or developmental delay, that is where Special Services at Home will come in. They will provide funds so that you can have your child out in the community doing different things. So it could be sending somebody to camp with them. It could be supports in the community to have them go out. Also, the big thing is respite. It gives us a break. I know when Andrew was younger, I was able to put him in day camps and pay for a worker to go along with him. They won't cover the cost of the camp, but they'll cover the cost to send a worker out with. I had a young man that would come and take him to Wonderland or out into the community to work on his social skills, and that gave me a much needed break at home to grocery shop or just have a bath and zone out. So those are two, if we have children under the age of 18, those are two very important ones that might be a benefit for you. If your child is over the age of 18, there's two main ones that we'll chat about tonight. One is passport funding through the Developmental Services Ontario. It basically is Special Services at Home that carries on once it stops after the age of 18. The passport funding then continues. So again, it covers resource costs for things to get them out into the community to help them transition into adulthood. And the other main one is the Ontario Disability Support Program, so otherwise known as ODSP. That is the biggest one, even if you're dealing with your children are younger than 18. It's very important to know what these supports will be once they get to that age, because I know we may be struggling day to day right now, but our concern is also too, what will happen when they're a little bit older, because that's a huge area. So Ontario Disability Support, you have to be considered to have a severe mental or physical disability to qualify. You have to be over the age of 18, you have to be living in Ontario, and you have to be considered in need of financial resources. So the nice thing is once you're over 18, the child's over 18, they consider yourself your own adult. So it does not matter what your parents' income is or how many assets they have, it's based on the child's assets and account. So if you qualify, you may be able to access employment supports. So they'll help you to find a job, resume writing skills, interview skills, those sorts of things. We also can help with health and dental, glasses, prescriptions, those sorts of things. The main resource is their income support. So it is a monthly income that would be paid out to your young adult or adult over the age of 18. And it's usually in between $800 and $1,150 a month, depending on whether they live at home or they're living out on the road. So again, they have to be considered in need of financial assistance. So there is an asset test and an income test that says if they have more than $40,000 to their name, they will not qualify. So they have to have less than $40,000 to qualify for funding. There is also an income test that says they can't have more than $10,000 a year in gifts or inheritance money from trusts. So that sort of puts them into this, in need of money aspect. They are allowed several exempt items that don't count for that asset or income test. They're allowed to own a home. They're allowed to have a vehicle. They can have, all of the normal personal belongings. They're allowed to have money in an education savings plan or in a registered disability savings plan without affecting that ODSP. They also can work while they're on ODSP. The first $200 that they earn is not touched whatsoever. Their ODSP stays the same. But once they start earning more than that, ODSP will be clawed back. It's a very incentive-driven calculation that goes into that. So they can be still making, $8, $9, even $1,000 a month and still get some form of that ODSP income. So ODSP, whether you're sort of at that stage or not, it's so very important that we plan around it, because this could be a guaranteed income stream for your child up until the age of 65. And everything that we do as far as financial planning and will planning and whatnot is to protect this income stream. Because if the child, let's say, receives an inheritance of $50,000 or more, they're knocked out of their ODSP income, and they may not be able to requalify. They may not have the resources to be able to requalify. So that's, we'll leave it there, but ODSP is sort of critical, even if you're dealing with a very young child at this point, something very important in the future to take into consideration. So two other resources that come into play at any age is the disability tax credit and the registered disability saving program. So I'll just touch on those a little bit to give you an idea. So the disability tax credit is a non-refundable tax credit, which means that it's not going to help you day to day, but it helps you when you do your income tax return. If you have taxation to pay, this is a credit that reduces that the taxes owing. Now, if this is on a child and they don't have any income, or they're not earning much as an adult, that income, that refundable tax credit can be transferred to the parents. So even if the child can't take advantage of it, the parents can, and that could make a huge difference, which is great. And they don't have to live at home as long as they're considered dependent on the parents. So to qualify for the disability tax credit, they must have a severe and prolonged physical or mental impairment. The key is they have to prove that they're 90% restricted from the activities of daily living, which is usually you're walking, you're feeding, you're talking, you're seeing, or mental functions necessary for everyday life. So it's very key when we apply. There's a form T2201 that a medical practitioner can complete, and it's opened up widely now. It doesn't just need to be a personal physician. It can be a specialist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, occupational therapist, nurse practitioner. They can complete that form. But you want a person to complete it that has the most in-depth knowledge of how your child is restricted, because it's big that we prove that 90% restriction. And so it's very key. They are getting stricter on some of the qualifications, and it just because they may have a disabled label does not necessarily mean that, oh, okay, you have diabetes, you get disability tax credit. It goes on that restriction aspect of it. So if you do get approved, or your child gets approved for the disability tax credit, they say you're approved from today going forward, and they may say there's an expiry date, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe at the age of 18, and that's when they have to reapply. Or it may be that it's indefinite, and you only have to reapply if they ask you to. That's a scenario. But when they approve, they can also say, we're going back 10 years. So if you've had, or your child's had that disability for 10 years or more, they can say, okay, yes, we're going to approve you, we're going to go back 10 years. And that allows them to redo your taxes for the last 10 years, which typically is a very large check that could be coming in to you. So the disability tax credit is if you're able to qualify. And then the last resource, huge resource, is the Registered Disability Savings Program. So with that, it's not something, again, that's going to help on a day-to-day basis, even months or a few years. This is a long-term savings program. We sort of akin it to, this is a retirement plan for the kids. And you may say, oh my gosh, that's so far in advance, we're not thinking about that. But as a parent, most often our concern is what's going to happen when we're no longer here. And at least if we know we've provided a nice financial resource that they can tap into, that's going to answer a lot of the concerns. So in order to qualify for the Registered Disability Savings Program, you need to be a Canadian, you need to have the disability tax credit, that's the one key. You need to have a social insurance number and be under the age of 60. Ideally, you want to be under the age of 49. Ideally, you want to be much younger, and we'll get into that. There's a lifetime contribution maximum most you can put into the plan. The government is willing to give hugely generous contributions into the plan. We'll talk about $90,000 per person with a disability. So the two main forms of assistance are the grant and the bond that the government's willing to give. So on the grant side, they are willing to contribute up until the child's age 49 and to a lifetime maximum of $70,000. So basically that breaks down to if the family net income is under $95,000, I'm just going to round figures here, but up to $95,000, the government's willing to give 300% on the first 500 you put into the plan and 200% on the next 1,000. So basically, if you put in $1,500 a year, they're going to give you $3,500 a year, free money, which is phenomenal. They're willing to do that for 20 years. So they're willing to give $3,500 for 20 years up to the maximum of $70,000. If the family net income, and remember, if the child is over 18, this is based on their income, not mom dad's. So if the family net income is over $95,000, they're willing to do an equal match up to $1,000. So if you put in $1,000, they'll match and put in another $1,000, so instantly doubling your money. And they're willing to do that up to the age of 49. So ideally, we want to start by at least 29 so that we can access that full $70,000. Now the bond is different. The bond, you don't have to make any contributions whatsoever into the plan. The bond is more for lower income individuals. Again, they'll pay the bond into the account up to the age of 49, and they're willing to do up to a maximum of $20,000 for each individual. So if the family net income is under $31,000, you're going to get a $1,000 bond into the account every year going forward that the income remains in the account. If the income's between $31,000 and $47,000, you'll get somewhere between $0 and $1,000. So basically, again, it's that 20-year time horizon. You put in $1,000 for 20 years, you'll get the maximum $20,000 the government's willing to give. So if you're eligible for the bond and the grant, basically there's $90,000 free money.
That's great info, Karen. I'm just jumping in a bit because some of the comments are that you're cutting out a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
You're clear. You got louder then, so I don't know. Maybe you're leaning
back. I'm almost done, but I'll be louder. I apologize.
No, that's great.
So then just a few other things on the Registered Disability Savings Program. You're able to take withdrawals from the plan, but if you do it before a certain period of time, there are penalties. So basically, this plan is a 30-year time horizon. You put the money in for 20 years to maximize the free government money, and then you have to hold and sit on the money for 10 years. So you put in for 20, you get all that government money, and then you sit on it for 10. So it's a 30-year time horizon. But if we start early, we can catch up on missed years, and we can shorten that time horizon. So we are able to make withdrawals from the plan, but if we do it within that 10-year hold period of time, every dollar we take out, we have to give $3 back to the government. Okay, so we want to wait until after we've satisfied that assistance holdback period, and then we get to keep all of that money. There is maximum calculation to come out, but they have to start taking income by at least their age 60. They can take it sooner, but they must start an income stream by 60 because the government wants the child to be using this money for themselves. And the big thing with the RDSP is, as we mentioned before, it's considered an exempt asset. So it's not affected by ODSP. You still get your ODSP, and you can have $500,000 in this registered disability plan. It won't be affected whatsoever. It doesn't come into play for low-income housing or anything where somebody has to evaluate your income from or your asset base. The RDSP is excluded from all those calculations. So I'm going to, unless there's questions before we turn it over to Tracey to talk about wills and whatnot.
There's several specific RDSP/RESP questions. So maybe it makes more sense to drop them in now.
Sure.
So I'm just going to read them so I'm not skewing people's their specific asks. So one of them was, we put a portion, and I think you've addressed this, but I just want to make sure. We put a portion of our neurotypical bio son's child benefit into an RESP with the expectation that he attends post-secondary someday. How do we provide that same financial life boost for a child who is very likely never to go to post-secondary? Is it worth it putting money in our ESP, or is there a better way? So what I'm hearing is the RDSP is the way that a family would.
Yes, so the RDSP, absolutely, you're going to get a lot more. The RESP gives you 20%. The RDSP, it's almost 233% of an incentive the government's giving. We just have to remember that that's not something that's going to help them should they, be able to do a small, community college course or whatnot. We can't take this money, or we're penalized heavily to take this money out. So as long as our time horizon is long term, then the RDSP, absolutely. You can put money into the RESP for the child and wait and see what happens. With the RESP and a disabled child, you're allowed to keep that plan in existence for 36 years before you have to make any decisions. And then we can do some transfers to go from the education plan to the RDSP. So there are a few options there that we or a financial advisor can help work through to see what's the best for you.
This next question somewhat ties into the whole shifting from one plan to the other. So it's a community family asking, for families who have adopted a child with special needs from CAS and have an RESP already created, can we switch that into an RDSP without penalties? My child will never be going to post-secondary.
Okay, so the money that you have put in or somebody's put into, the contributions that go into the RESP, the education plan, they can come back out to you if your child is disabled without any penalties, without any repercussions. You can then take those dollars and put them into an RDSP. Now, any grant money will be sent back to the government on the education plan, but that's okay because you're going to get more money in grant on the RDSP side. It's only the growth on the education plan that would be taxed and penalized, but that can be transferred directly into the RDSP without penalty or taxation.
Awesome. That's great information. Another one, this is clearly a topic that a lot of our families have questions on. For a family RESP, where we have more than one child with special needs, what happens to the funds if they do not go to post-secondary? We have a third child not with no special needs who cannot possibly use all of these funds herself.
Okay, so if it's in a family RESP for education purposes, you can use the money you've put in for any of the family, any of the siblings can be used. If you've maximized it and the government's given the maximum of $7,200 for each child, you can only use $7,200 for each child. So if one person's used that $7,200 of grant, they can't use somebody else's $7,200 of grant. They can use their contributions, just not that grant because it is per child. But everything else, the growth and the contributions can be used for any of the other children in the plan.
Perfect. I think that's all of the RERDSP specific questions.
Okay.
And if more pop up, we can circle back, but I think we're good to move on to Tracey.
Okay.
All right, I'm unmuted, am I? Yeah. All right, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about wills, last will and testaments to start with. Of course, everybody knows that they need a will. If you don't have a will, you have an intestacy, and legislation will govern who gets your assets after you die. And of course, a will is important when you have children or incapable children, adults who you are legally the guardian of. If you are legally the guardian of somebody, then you can appoint a guardian in your will. So for children, naming a guardian is the first thing I want to cover before we go into the Henson Trust. Naming a guardian is essential if you have children, so that if something happens to you immediately, that they have somebody to go home with. So if you don't have a will that names a guardian, the authorities, children's aid, whoever is in charge won't know who that child can go home with, and they'll take them until they can determine the best interest of the child. So if there's nobody there right away, they won't know where to go. And for that reason, because it is just immediately at that point in time, a guardianship clause in a will is only good for 90 days. So it is a short-term measure, but it's to make sure your child has somewhere to go if for some reason the parents do not come home. After 90 days, you do have to apply to the court for permanent guardianship of the child. And in such case, you can have people who come forward at that point and want to challenge. So whoever you name in the will have preference in the court of law, as your interests are paramount to the court of who you think is the best person to name in the best interest of your child. So they will have priority in the case of any application, but there will be a court application where other people can apply at the end of 90 days for guardianship in a will. Regarding a will, when you do have special needs children and you don't think that they will be employable, the best way that we can protect their income from the government, if they get ODSP, is a method called a Henson Trust. And a Henson Trust is named after a court case where Mr. Henson argued that the trust that he had established for his special needs child was not actually an asset and shouldn't count for the asset test for that child to lose their benefits. So in the case of a Henson Trust, it is a very, very specific trust that has to be drafted almost identically to the one that Mr. Henson had set up for his child. But the result is that you have a discretionary trust that doesn't count as an asset for your child if they inherit through that Henson Trust. So with a guardianship, the most important thing to think of in a Henson Trust is who is the best person to be the trustee. So that person is going to be in charge of that money for your child as long as they're able to, and then they can appoint another trustee. So a Henson Trust is fully discretionary, but they do have some options. The ODSP limits annually are $10,000 in gifts. So they can give that child up to $10,000 a year, and they can stretch it over in monthly or quarterly payments so that they have some kind of regular income if they wish, or they can give it to them all at once annually, whatever they want to set up, whatever's in the best interest of the child. They do have an asset limit of $40,000. So I do have one special needs child who has grown up with a Henson Trust, and he is now 65, so he's not getting ODSP anymore. And he's asked for his Henson Trust to be dissolved because he's 65 and he can just take all the money and it won't affect his income anymore. So so we're working on that, but for the time being, we've given him $40,000 for the asset limit to manage it and to see how he can do without affecting anything else, and kind of as a good guideline for can you work with this money and kind of make a difference in your life without abusing the privilege. Let's see, I'm so used to having a question and answer kind of format, so I'm usually been interrupted by this time.
We do have Henson Trust questions, so I'm happy to throw some at you. No problem. So I will find the specific. So here's a doozy for you, though. I don't know if you're ready. Okay. So it's one of our community parents. I have a family member leaving a generous amount of money for our child in his will, close to $1 million. We are struggling about putting it into a Henson Trust versus having both parents inherit on our child's behalf. We, as the parents, will also receive an inheritance. How can we protect our whole family, but also have access to the funds as needed, including accessible vans, nanny, etc.?
So a Henson Trust, I forgot to mention, you can also buy any exempt assets out of the Henson Trust as a trustee. So so you can buy the van. ODSP recipients are allowed to own a house, so you can actually buy a house for them as an investment. And I did have some parents do that. They bought a house for their special needs daughter, and they're setting up kind of a group home where there's going to be a couple of other children in the house with their care workers, and it's going to be in their daughter's name, and it's going to be their daughter's assets. So you can own a home if you're receiving ODSP and a car. But as far as funding a Henson Trust, you can overfund a Henson Trust because it's unlikely that your child will need $1 million, quite frankly. If they're getting that $10,000 a year, you know, you have to think about, Karen can talk about return on investments and everything, but $1 million is going to make more than $10,000 a year. Am I right? Not if I'm right, Karen. So, I mean, $1 million is probably overfunding a Henson Trust, and it would be probably be better used in the parents' hands so that they can do other investments and other things with the money and pass it on to other people. A Henson Trust, once it's in, the person who's leaving it, a Henson Trust has to be in a will. So the person who is making the will and has the Henson Trust, they decide who gets the money that's left over. And in the case of $1 million, there would be a lot left over, and the person who is deceased would be the one making that decision about it. And, you know, 20, 30, 50 years down the road, that decision might not be relevant anymore. The people that they were considering as the gift over are maybe not around, or maybe they won the lottery in the meantime and somebody else could better use the money. So so yeah, overfunding a Henson Trust is definitely an issue, and you should talk to those relatives, those very kind relatives, about how best to place it, and maybe get some legal advice for their estate planning, because there is lots of things that they can do.
Perfect. One of the other questions specifically to the Henson Trust is, if you want to use more than $40,000 a year for a child, is there a better option?
Well, the $40,000 asset limit means if they have more than $40,000 in the bank, there's going to be, the ODSP will technically be canceled, right? So you'll lose the ODSP as soon as you have over $40,000. They do rely on self-reporting, but they do audit. So if you have 40,010, you know, there may not be an issue. But if you have 60,000, you're probably going to get a phone call or a letter saying, you know, you have too much money, we're canceling your ODSP, and then you have to get below the threshold and apply again, which may not be a concern for people with marked disabilities, but I've had clients who have lost their disability and have been unable to get back on it after they lost it. So, and if you don't have grandparents or friends, family that know about a Henson Trust, because it's not really common knowledge, you would only know about it if you spoke to a lawyer, unfortunately. You can inherit up to $100,000 and have it be put into a trust after the person has died and you've inherited it. So there is that one loophole. You can inherit up to $100,000. A lawyer can help you put into a trust, and you can also put it into an RDSP. So and you won't lose your ODSP. So there are options, and I have done some creative planning with clients on ODSP who inherit over $100,000. So one client, he inherited $130,000, and he actually bought a car for his group home, and it was used because they just had a really old van. So he bought a new car for the group home, and it was an exempt asset, and he put $100,000 in trust. So there are things that you can do if people don't know about a Henson Trust, but it is good to get the word out there about it. So
That's great. Karen, I see you. Did you, I seen the little finger. Did you have something to add there?
Well, I was going to add about the inheritance trust, but Tracy did jump in on that. But also just to note with the Henson Trust, we say that there is that $10,000 annual income that can be paid out of it, but you can also pay more if it's for a disability-related item.
yeah, an exempt.
So that too is an exempt. So if it is for a disability-related item, you can pay out as much as needed. So just to note that as well.
Perfect. Did you want to move on, Tracy?
Yes, I have about 10 more minutes of talking, right?
Yeah, we're around 20 minutes left, and there's some other questions that'll bounce us around. So
Okay, so I want to talk about powers of attorneys and guardianships, and I touched a little bit on guardianships in wills and how much it means to have the right person named. But I want to touch on powers of attorneys for yourself, the people I'm talking to. So there's two types of powers of attorney: power of attorney for healthcare and a power of attorney for property. And a power of attorney for healthcare is for making your healthcare, medical, personal decisions when you're not able to. So, so for people in decent health, I mean, it would happen in the case of an accident, an end-of-life decision where somebody has to decide if you're going to have emergency surgery or if you're on life support in a coma, if something is going to happen to you. So that's what an attorney for healthcare is. If you're getting older, attorney for healthcare will decide, you know, what nursing home you move into, what you're eating, what your medications are, and that kind of thing. So an attorney for healthcare is a very personal document. An attorney for property is more of a common sense kind of role. The person you name has to take care of your bills and your assets if something happened to you and you're not able to manage them on your own. So power of attorney for property that I do at my office is actually called a continuing power of attorney for property, and it comes into effect as soon as you sign it. And if you want your grantee, if you want the person you appointed to use it, you can give it to them, and it's actually valid at that time. So if you want to travel, or if you're under the weather for 3 months, you can get your attorney for property to take care of things for you. But it is mostly used for people who are incapable. Sometimes people have the capacity to make decisions, but they've lost their eyesight or their hearing, and they don't feel comfortable dealing with those kind of things. But again, it's a very practical role that people need to take as an attorney for property. And where I really want to go with this is wills and powers of attorneys are part of your estate planning, but when it comes to your special needs child, so when they turn 18, somebody's going to have to determine if your child has the capacity to make a power of attorney for healthcare and to make a power of attorney for property. And that person is a lawyer like myself who can do a capacity assessment. So if they are in the hospital and unable to communicate, the attorney for healthcare will make the decisions for them. And if they're not able to take care of their finances or manage their finances appropriately, the attorney for property can take over for them. So it is, of course, a spectrum, right? So some people can appear like they are capable. I had one client who had an emergency reaction to bee sting, I think it was, and went to the hospital, and the school brought her to the hospital, and she was 19, and she had a phobia to needles. So they explained to her that she needed a needle for the bee sting, and she absolutely refused it, even though it would have been dangerous for her not to have it. And they assumed that she was capable of making that decision for herself until her mother showed up in the emergency room and said, she is not capable of understanding that she is going to get worse if you don't give her this shot, and she needs to have the shot, give her the shot. So, so it is important that if they are capable, that they do a power of attorney for healthcare and a power of attorney for property, so that you can assist them with those kind of things. And it's a very reasonable document. I only charge a few $100s for powers of attorney for healthcare and property. But the option is to obtain a guardianship. And a guardianship application is a court application. And the minimum cost is $5,000. I've had them go up to $15,000, $20,000 when they've been challenged by other family members. So to have a power of attorney done is, of course, the better option, but sometimes it's just not possible. It has been the case in the past that people have gotten away with just continuing making the decisions for their children because they live in a place where everybody's familiar with them. They know their child has special needs. They know that mom is taking care of the child, so they don't ever question whether or not they have the right to make the decisions. But if you move someplace new, or somebody new comes into the bank, or somebody at the doctor's office gets a little keen on their law, you might have to prove that you actually have the legal right. And once they're 18, you don't have that legal right unless they give it to you or the court gives it to you. So I actually just did a guardianship application for a man who was 75. And he lived with his brother. His parents took care of him. His brother took care of him. And then they'd never had any problems because they always used the same bank. All their life, they walked in there and did their banking together. And even though he couldn't read or write and had never been to school, they let him sign his documents, and nobody ever questioned anything until his brother got sick and their friend tried to bring him in and do some banking with him. And they said, well, you're not his brother. What are you doing here? So we actually had to get his brother and their friend appointed so that in case something happened to the brother, because although they'd gotten away with it for all of their life, it became an issue as they got older. So oftentimes I tell people, you can let it go for a while once they turn 18, because people don't know they're 18, and sometimes people aren't going to bug you about it. But you should start saving up for that guardianship application around the time they're 16 if you think they're not going to be able to appoint somebody legally, because it is a big expense. And I do have one client right now who's actually banking her retainer. She gives me $100 every couple of weeks, and when we get to $5,000, she's going to do her application, and she's getting away with it so far, and we're just going to work on it that way. So it is unfortunately a necessity in this day and age where things have happened that made people more cautious. So
I love all the examples.
I've been doing this for a long time, so
it just helps me wrap my mind around some of what you're saying. There was a question, and I think that the guardianship piece or the power of attorney piece kind of answers it, but it's are there ways to protect us as the parent or primary caregiver in case we become ill? And is this what we should be thinking of, a power of attorney?
Yes.
So that somebody else? Okay.
Yes, so your power of attorney for property has all the legal rights over your property that you do. So if you're worried about your child, staying at home and having the bills paid while you're ill in the hospital or away somewhere, then on a cruise ship in Japan, because you might have coronavirus, those poor people, then you can activate your power of attorney, and they can make sure that the house is taken care of back home, and you can go in and make sure that the plants are watered and the cats are fed, and the children have the lights on and the power on and are getting fed regularly, right? So that's the job of the power of attorney for property.
And that can be turned off and on, or
exercised,
not exercised?
So what I do with a power of attorney for property is I store them at my office. And so say you named your child. It often happens that people, as they get older and their children get into the 30s and 40s, that they name their children. So So if you name your daughter and she calls me up and says, Dad says he has his power of attorney for property there, I need to pick it up. Well, I call my client and say, do you want your daughter to have your power of attorney? And if he says no, then she doesn't get it. Sometimes they'll say, well, Dad's lost it and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And in that case, I will actually go see Dad and talk to him and see whether or not he has actually lost it, or if she's just trying to get the power of attorney. A power of attorney document is a very powerful document. They can go take all the money out of your account. They can mortgage your house. They can sell your house. And they can do anything legally that you can. They can enter into contracts on your behalf. So it is an instrument for fraud. So it is important that it be taken care of appropriately. So so that's why we store it and take care of it in that way. But a power of attorney does have to account to interested parties. So other people in the family can ask for an accounting. You as the grantor can ask for an accounting. But really it comes back to naming the right person, just like with a will. You've got to name people that you trust, that share your values, that know what you prioritize and will take care of it if you can't.
Perfect. And we're getting down to our last 10 minutes, so I want to make sure that I get the questions that have come in. And I think this incorporates a little bit of everything that both yourself and Karen have talked about this evening, but it says, what will happen when we are no longer here to take care of our children? What resources and strategies can we put into place to ensure that they're financially okay? So that's kind of encompassing of everything that I'm hearing, right? The RDSP, Henson Trust, power of attorney, guardianship, like life insurance, everything, right? So it really, we need to be thinking ahead, which I think a lot of people are afraid to do, even without having children with exceptionalities.
Yeah.
And unless you see a lawyer, you can't put life insurance into a Henson Trust. So life insurance is something that you should be cautious of. If you just name your child a beneficiary, they'll lose their OUSP automatically as soon as they get that life insurance benefit, right? So, but if you do it through a will and you do, if you do it through the will and a properly drafted Henson Trust, it will be fine. So just seek legal advice in that case, creating an estate like that.
Would it be the same situation if it was in trust? So to your child in trust of an older sibling?
No, because that's not a Henson Trust. A Henson Trust is a very specifically worded document that has to be, it has to have key components that the court in the Henson Trust case determined made it an exempt asset. So it has to be fully discretionary. So the person who is the beneficiary can't have any rights to that money whatsoever, even to income after 20 years when you can no longer accumulate income. You have to account for that income somehow. So it is a little bit tricky, and if you haven't drafted one before as a lawyer, it's easy to make a couple of little slip ups. So it's important to get a lawyer who knows how to draft one and has done so successfully in the past.
Awesome. So this question comes from one of our community members as well. And it says, I'm hoping that you'll cover the bigger picture, that you two will cover the bigger picture, which I think obviously you have. It's a lot of information to intake. So thankfully we're recording and we can review it back. So that's great. But how can you plan ahead without knowing the specific needs of your maybe future child? So in our community, some of our families are in an awaiting situation or a getting ready situation. So how can you have that forethought if you're not sure if your child will come into your home with special needs or neurotypical?
So I think I can answer that because I do have clients whose children are on the spectrum and may be employable at some point, or may outlive their ODSP, like in the case of this gentleman that I spoke about earlier. Really, a Henson Trust is a hugely flexible instrument. It's just dependent upon naming the right person. So when you're planning, you have to consider your support network. and they are the people who are going to continue on for your child, no matter what they are. And a Henson Trust, because it's fully discretionary, they can dissolve it at any time. So if the child turns out to be employable and has a great career and manages their money just fine, you can dissolve that trust and give it to them. Or if they can live independently and they want a house, you can give them the down payment for the money, or you can pay for the whole darn house. It's a really flexible instrument, but it's really dependent upon the person that you appoint to be the trustee. So it's important that they share your values and you've shared with them your hopes and dreams for that child, so they can actually give effect to your wishes.
That's awesome. One of the questions from a live viewer was, I've heard that special services at home is still frozen. Is that still the case?
That I don't know for sure. I've been a little out of the loop on ACSD and special services at home, and with all the passport changes and government changes and whatnot. I'm sorry, I don't know for sure where that sits at the present time.
That's not a problem. We can put a link up in the comments and
Yeah.
help families follow the link, and I'm sure that someone will know the answer.
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty in healthcare, especially home healthcare, with the changeover from the LHINs to the family health team. So I think the next couple of years will be very, very tense for people as they try to navigate the changes.
Absolutely. I think we've gone through all of the questions that have come in from the community, and we have about 5 more minutes. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on? Anything we may have not gotten really deep into, or either of you?
Well, if I could, I would just say I think the most important, every situation is so different. Every family unit is so different, and there's so many resources, so many, yes, you can do this, but it counter affects this. And I would say just make sure you're working with somebody that has that sort of expertise, you know, either a lawyer that specializes in Henson Trust, and which there's not very many of, I can tell you, or a financial advisor that, you know, knows these things. Like, make sure you're working with the right experts, because unfortunately, being a mom of a special needs child, even in this background, I was misled down several paths over the years until I did my own, you know, years and years and a lot of gray hair of investigation. So there's just so many things at play, and that some of them coexist and some don't work well together. And there's just, even when we were just talking about trust, I mean, there's so many different types and different things that can be done to sort of, so just make sure that you're working with somebody that knows all the, you know, our ESPs and how does everything work together. And because as you said, you don't know for sure whether you are going to take on a child that has special needs or not special needs. And there's just so much. We just barely touch the surface. There's just so much out there.
And I think in general, whether we're talking of a child with exceptionalities or any child, when you're looking to the future and the unknown, it can feel really, really heavy. And when we're raising children, you know, with any bit of exceptionality or any bit of difficulty in their world, you can already feel like, oh my gosh, like there's just no space for this. So I think we have to feel or push through the uncomfortably of saying to people, like, do you know about this? Do you know about a Henson Trust? Do you know, like, and that can feel awkward for people. I think I would be like, oh, I'm picking this name because, you know, my neighbor said, go to Sally, she's amazing. But Sally may have been amazing for her situation, but may not know all the ins and outs and the kinks, because all this information you ladies have laid out today, it's a lot, and it feels like you need the right person to help navigate through that. So just like a lot of our life, it's being willing to be uncomfortable and ask that question and be like, hey, Tracey, do you know what a Henson Trust is? And you're saying it's not everybody's comfortable with that, right? So it's heavy on a normal day, but I think it would be beneficial for everyone to take that leap sooner, from what I'm understanding, rather than later. You know, waiting for our child's 10, 11, 12, you're going to run out of time really quickly, from what I'm hearing. So
that's the worst thing that we can do, is because it's so overwhelming, we don't do anything, right? It's just too much to attack it, and we just let it go, and then trouble.
Absolutely. Well, you ladies have been unbelievably informative. I thought I had the stuff clear in my head, and I learned so much tonight. So I very, very much appreciate it. Everyone that tuned in live, thanks for your questions and for hanging out with Tracey and I this evening. We will be posting in all of our groups, and this webinar will go live on our YouTube channel and our webpage as well. So we are not expecting anyone to remember all of this information. And Karen and Tracey, both of your tags and things so people can find you if they want to reach out. Is that appropriate?
Oh, absolutely. And I get free consults, so don't feel intimidated about calling me and spending an hour with me. I love to meet people and hear their stories, and if you don't want to work with me at the end of that hour, then that's completely fine with me. I don't think that's a problem, so please come visit me and talk to me and see if I can help you out.
You may just have filled your entire 2020 date books, ladies. That's awesome. All right. Well, I'm just going to make sure that I'm not missing any live comments right now. I think we're good. So again, thank you so very much for giving us your time this evening and giving us your knowledge. Like, you've been incredible. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening,
you.
everybody.
I'm glad it went well. I was a nervous wreck.
It's wonderful. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye-bye.